Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of The Writer's Block. My name is Di. I'm going to be your host for the evening, obviously brought to you by True Faith. I'm joined by Craig, Lee, and James. How are you doing, lads?
All right, fellas.
Very well. Good to have you all on. Nice that we're talking about not a defeat. First time hasn't happened, so I'm delighted to be here. We've got three cracking topics for you tonight. We're going to talk about the best formation and lineup that we think will keep Newcastle up this season. We're going to talk about Darlow and Dubravka, and we're going to talk about our favourite away days as well. Craig, I'm going to get straight into it with you, mate. What do you think our best lineup is? Most importantly, what do you think will keep us up?
It's a really good question, isn't it? And I think it's something they touched on in the podcast at the weekend. If you'd have asked me the question before the weekend's fixture, I probably would have said a completely different formation and a completely different lineup. But just seeing us play that positively, it sort of focused me in on what I think we need both in the team and system-wise to stay up. I've went with the 3-4-3. Now, cynics amongst you may say that's just a 5 at the back, but I'm resolutely saying it's a 3-4-3. I'll just rattle off the personnel I would use, and I'll tell you why I've gone with that. So, got Dubravka in goal, a back three of Fernandes, Lascelles, and Dummett. 4 across the middle of Murphy, Willock, Sean Longstaff, and Matt Ritchie, and then up front I've got St Maximin, Wilson, and Almiron. I think there's a couple of notes on the weekend. Really, I think everybody's said how important and influential Matt Ritchie was at the weekend. I was very encouraged to see that, to give the manager his due, he'd let bygones be bygones and put him back in the team. And I think his sort of tub-thumping enthusiasm and sort of cajoling of his teammates was there for all to see. He had a role in both goals as well. That delivery from that left-hand side was influential. Just some legs in midfield as well. I think Shelvey, for me, hasn't really done it for a number of weeks now. I think the manager's loyalty has been undying, but I think it's long past its sell-by date, that experiment now, sort of in that quarterback-type position. So really want to go with that legs in midfield. Willock's impressed me. I thought he was unlucky to be dropped at the weekend, but I loved how he came off the bench and made his mark and sort of to give the manager a reminder that, there's no way you should be dropping me for the remaining games. And yeah, I think Murphy as well. A bit of a shout for Murphy as well. Bit of an unsung hero for us this season. I don't think he's let us down once when he's played off the bench, when he's started in unfamiliar positions. As admittedly, this possibly is at right wing back, but his delivery has been fantastic. I've been very, very impressed. He was a player I would have sold at the start of the season. So yeah, what I've gone for is, rather than that sort of 5 defenders, I've tried to get 3 really good centre-backs in, but then proper delivery from wide, so Ritchie and Murphy, and then obviously we've got the 3 key players up front, the sort of the holy trinity, if you like. We need Wilson back, and I think he performs best when he's got ASM and Almiron either side of him, but also the width and the crosses we'll get in from wide will also serve him well.
Lee, do you agree? They're obviously devastating to see that Craig is dropped Big Joe after his exploits on the weekend. So I'm personally upset about that. But what do you think? Would you be happy with a 3-4-3? Have you got another way to go?
I've personally gone for a 4-2-3-1. I think, given the most effective front 4 we've got, I think that's probably the only way to go personally. As a back 4, I've gone with Manquillo. I think let's be honest, everybody would be in agreement that he's our most consistent right back. He's got good energy to get up and down the flanks. In terms of 2 centre-halves, I've got Lascelles. I can't see Lascelles being dropped for love and money. He's club captain. What it would do to the relationship between him and Bruce would be unrecoverable for me. I've gone for Kieran Clark on the left-hand side of centre-half, and I've gone for Dummett at left-back. I'm a firm believer in square pegs in square holes. And with Clark and Dummett, you've got natural left footers. Yeah, they're playing in positions that they're comfortable with. If you're chasing a game, you could potentially swap out Manquillo and Dummett for Ritchie and Murphy, as Craig was alluding to there. Coming on to the 2 in front of the back 4, I'd be looking at Willock and Longstaff. Similarly to what Craig suggested, Shelvey's legs aren't what they need to be in what's going to be a battle for the next 8 games. We need energy in that midfield. We need young legs that can get up and down the park, can protect the back four, but equally can get up to support the attacking players. And from a front four perspective, I've gone with Miggy as a 10. Personally, I think Miggy's far more effective in a 10 than he is playing out wide, personally, with St. Maximin to one side and Fraser to the left. When I was putting that team down, I thought to myself, I've literally dropped Richie after he's just had a really, really good game on Sunday. But for me, this is our strongest team. And Wilson up top. Wilson's a very, very good lone striker. He runs both channels. He can hold the ball up well, gives opportunities for Miggy, for Fraser, for our St. Maximin to get up and around him. Biggest concern I've got with that front four would be height. They're not the biggest front four, but on the flip side, they've got pace. They've got pace coming out of their ears. They have, and defenders are shit scared of pace, let's be honest. So for me, I'm going with a 4-2-3-1.
I think what you said there is about the pace. It kind of, I feel, negates the height issue a little bit.
Yeah.
I think if you have that movement, the need to go longer, like we do sometimes, is there less. I also am a little bit blown away by the idea of square pegs in square holes. That's a mind blowing thing to me. And I don't know if Steve Bruce watches, maybe it might be something he might try out. Who knows? James, that's 4-2-3-1 for Lee. What are you saying?
Well, I've picked something different to Craig and different to Lee, actually. So room for a good debate here. I've gone with a 4-4-2. I think if you look at two of our better performances this season, which were West Ham away, first game of the season, and Burnley at home, that's the formation we played. I believe we started as a 4-4-2 8 times this season, with other wins coming against Palace away and West Brom at home with that formation. So it has worked and it has been successful. Coming on to who I would pick, now that's a different story. The reason I've gone 4-4-2 is because I'd like to see Wilson and Gale playing in the same team. I know it might sound crazy because they've not started together this season, considering Gale's only started a very small number of games. But now with Wilson back, I think we need goals. We need to score goals if we need to stay up. And I think they're our best chance, that those two are our best chance of scoring goals. So if I'm going to run through my 11, I've gone with Darlow in goal. We'll come on to that later as to why I've gone with Darlow. But yeah, I'll give my reasons for that later. I've gone for Mankiw at right back. He's an absolute must. Lee mentioned him before. I won't reiterate what Lee said. He's comfortably our best right back at the club by some distance. I've gone for Clark and Lascelles as the pairing. Again, like Lee mentioned, Lascelles is virtually undroppable club captain. Slightly can go missing sometimes defensively, but I just think if you're looking at the options we have with Cher injured, I think Lascelles and Clark have to play. I'm actually going to pick Matt Ritchie as a left back. I think based predominantly on that performance on Sunday, I thought he was man of the match. I thought he was outstanding. You go into the trenches, you're in the trenches, your back's up against the wall. You need to be plucky with a few games to go. He's the guy you want in that team. He carries players sometimes and really gets the best out of a lot of players around him. But in the middle, I'm going to go with Sean Longstaff. I think he's got an opportunity now to prove himself his worth and regain that form that he showed under Rafa. I think I'm going to go with Ryan Fraser and Maximin in the two wide positions. Miggy can play as a number 10, and then again, I mentioned before, I'd like to see Wilson play with Gale. But then with that, you've got the likes of Willock, you've got Murphy who can come off the bench and do a job for you. But I certainly wouldn't have Shelby, Hendrick, or Joe Linton anywhere near the side, if I'm honest. I know it's obvious to say, but look, Joe Linton did okay on Sunday. I mean, he loves to play against Spurs, doesn't he? But, for me, he really struggles to adapt to different systems. And if you need to change the system throughout the game, which we sometimes do, and I encourage us to do that, he's limited in what he brings to the table on that basis. But if you think about Joe Linton, he's arguably been the player that was brought in to replace Jose Perez, and he's just nowhere near the level of Jose and what he used to bring to the side. But yeah, for me, I would go with a 4-4-2 and just get the ball into Wilson Gale as much as possible, and we'll score goals.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you've said. I think I would disagree with you about Darlow, and I think that's a good argument that we will come to have in a moment. I think for me, I'm going to slightly cop out, mainly because I think Lee read my notes and stole my 4-2-3-1 idea. But I think if I'm honest, the key to this is not the setup and the formation and the players. Obviously, playing the right players in the right position, as a novel idea, obviously helps. But I think for me, it's the way we press and attack the game, and that was what was pleasing about the game on the weekend. Everyone, Spurs were rubbish, blah blah blah. They were, but I think you've got to give credit where credit's due sometimes. And I think we pressed them and harried them and made life uncomfortable for them. And the fact that we had more shots than we've had from inside the box in 7 years, I think the stat was. I think, all right, Spurs may have not had the best day, but we also capitalised on that. And I think that comes from us playing up the pitch a little bit more and being less on our heels, less inviting the pressure on. So to me, I'd be happy to continue with this with a 5 at the back, similar to what you mentioned, Craig. And I agree with you, James, as well. The way we ended the game with 4-4-2, I thought we got the goal from that. I think it kind of put pressure on them. I would agree with what Lee said. If I was forced to make a decision, I think I would play the 4-2-3-1. I played Dubravka in goal. Manquillo, again, I'm not going to repeat what everyone said, but I would change the centre halves. I would drop Lascelles. I know he's a club captain, but you've still got to play well on a Saturday when it comes to it. And I don't think I've seen him play well for a while. He looks slow. I don't think he's fully recovered from his injuries. So I play Fernandes and Dummett, who I think are the two best defenders at the club, centre half. And for the reasons that you've all gave, I'd play Richie at left back as well. I think his attitude is so positive and gives people a kick up the arse that they need a lot of the time.
Literally.
Yeah, exactly. It's either someone's arse or the corner flag. One of them.
What I would say about Lascelles, sorry, Dad, just to interrupt, is he does get you the odd goal, which I think, again, coming back to goals is what we need. And I'm not saying he's going to score 5 or 6, but he has come up with an important goal or two this season. And look, I'm not saying he's the answer, long run, what have you, but that could be important for us.
I would also counter, I think you're right, and I would counter that, though, with Fernandes has also got goals himself. There is that, and I think for me he reads the game better. The ultimate problem, I think, in our back four, which doesn't really matter regardless of any combination we pick, is that none of them are very quick. And Dummett has got a bit of gas about him, to be fair, but in the centre of the pitch, none of them are very quick. So that is our biggest downfall. So that's why I'd play Fernandes. I think he's a better kind of reader of the game. But again, I mean, I think ultimately the difference between us winning or losing a game, the toss-up there is just our opinion. I don't think anyone is markedly better than the other. I think I would disagree in midfield that one is markedly better than the other. I think I agree with what you said, James. To have Shelvey and Hendrick nowhere near the team would be the best thing we could do. I would have both of the Longstaffs in there. I love Matty's energy. He gets up and down. He does not stop moving. And Sean Longstaff showed on the weekend. He's got that bit of box to box in him. He's got a bit of grit in him. He's not afraid to put a tackle in. I think Miggy's best position is out wide. I think as a number 10, he can kind of drop too deep. And I think putting him out wide would help Richie, kind of protect Richie a little bit, because I don't mind him tracking back so much there. Obviously, ASM on the other side. I'd play Willock as a 10, because again, I think him breaking into the box late is a real asset, and we haven't really had that player for a long time. His movement, I think, is excellent. And obviously, Joe Linton up front. No, I'm joking. Wilson obviously starts up front. I think I appreciate the courtesy laugh there, lads. I just think we've got a lot of real quality there. And you look at the bench, and you've got Fraser to come in, Murphy again, who you lads mentioned before has been excellent. So, I mean, ultimately, if we do go to the 5-3-2 that we started, or finish with a 4-4-2, obviously, James, you would prefer the 4-4-2. But do you see kind of there being a benefit to either one of those? I'll come back to you, James, just because you mentioned the 4-4-2 earlier. Would you kind of persist with that, or are you kind of not actually that bothered as long as we play a bit more on the front foot?
Well, I think if you look at the 5-3-2, which you mentioned, and we have utilised that a few times this season. I mean, look, it worked to a point against Spurs on Sunday, and if you look at the Everton home game, which we won back in November, we play the 5-3-2. But I do think with a 5-3-2, and the reason why I didn't pick it for my preferred formation is it restricts your attacking options somewhat. So you've effectively got to leave out one attacking player. And if you're going to play 5 at the back, yeah, you would have more attacking fullbacks, but you would have to leave out someone like a Fraser or a Gale, in my opinion, from the team I picked. But what I will say is, and this might be speaking the obvious, but we can't go back to a 5-4-1 again this season. And we played that a few times against some of the better oppositions, but we played it against Sheffield United back in January, and I think everyone could see that was just suicidal. And thankfully, we've not gone back to that again, and I hope that continues that way. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Bruce goes with the diamond split striker system again that Graham Jones came in with against worked away at Everton when we had a fully fit squad at that point. But subsequently, of course, as we know, Wilson, Almiron, and Maximum got injured, and Bruce persisted with it for several games, most notably against Palace, which were lost, Man U away, which were lost, and the West Brom 0-0. So yeah, look, I think that the encouraging thing about the performance and system that we played on Sunday is that we were showing that we're capable utilising the 5-3-2, but more especially the 4-4-2, which I'm an advocate for.
Yeah, I can see that 100%, and I think everything you said there is spot on. I think the reason it worked against Everton, and to an extent, I think the reason we did well on the weekend, is because it was something new. I think Spurs and Everton back then were expecting us to play a certain way. We didn't, and they just couldn't react to it in time. So I do worry a little bit that the formation, like I said before, almost doesn't matter if teams are now kind of wise to what we're doing, because we can't obviously select a new formation every week. But yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said there. What about you, Lee? If we were going to stick to the one or the other, the 5-3-2 or the 4-4-2, what would you have?
Can I choose neither? Listen, the reason I'm adamant that we shouldn't play a 2, whether that be in a 5-3-2 or a 4-4-2, is I don't think we've got 2 strikers who can be effective together. I know James mentioned earlier, Gale and Wilson. For me, they're too similar a player to be effective together. After that, you've got Carroll, who will not see out a 60-minute game, and he doesn't look like he's got a goal in him. And then you've got Joe Linton. Who would you pair with Wilson in that 2? Gale's probably the obvious choice, but for me, Gale and Wilson are far too similar type players in terms of running down the channels, pace, and what have you. So for me, it has to be a 4-2-3-1. Wilson's a very, very good lone striker. As I said earlier, he holds the ball up. He can bring players into it. He can bring your ASMs, your Miggies, your Frasers, your Willocks even. So for me, Wilson up top on his own is our best option going into the last 8 games.
If you look at Wilson at Bournemouth, though, and he played alongside Josh King, and that was a very fruitful partnership. And I did base that decision about playing Gale and Wilson on the fact that King and Wilson, very similar players, and it would work for them then.
I'm just looking at what we've got available to us. As I said, Joe Linton hasn't got a goal in him. Andy Carroll hasn't got fitness and hasn't got a goal in him. And I just see too many similarities between Gale and Wilson. I'd love to be proved wrong. But for me, as I say, a 3 behind Wilson, for me, gives us lots of attacking impetus and threats.
Did you not see that clinical finish from 6 yards out on the weekend? Alan Shearer would have took that one.
He got a lot of credit for the finish, but let's be honest, it was put on a player for him, wasn't it?
I think the reason he got a lot of credit is because everyone in the world, probably including him, expected him to miss it. So when the ball hits the back of the net, we're like, oh, bloody hell, that's how you finish that.
I'd love nothing more for it to fill the lad with confidence, for him to get another 4 or 5 goals in the last 8 games. But there's as much chance of being bitten by a lettuce leaf, let's be fair.
Do you know what? I would like to stand up a bit for Joe, because I thought, I have just slagged him off and I just stand up for him, but I thought he had his best game for us probably ever on the weekend. And I thought his work rate, and I felt like he put a lot into the game. And do you know what? Yes, he could have scored more. He has zero confidence. His finishing is very average. But I think playing alongside someone showed a little bit more what he's capable of. And I agree. What I think you said before, James, that he was brought in to replace Perez, and and he's not been given an opportunity to do that. And I think when he has been given more of that chance, I think it shows what he's capable of. I'm not suggesting that he's the answer by any stretch, but I do think he was I think we slag him enough, not us four per se, but I think as a fan base. So I think he deserves a bit of credit from when he deserves it.
I would agree with you, Di. I think Sunday was his best game in a black and white shirt. I genuinely do. I think it's whole.
And there's not much to choose from, is there?
No, in fairness, but as you say, it's a low bar.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
That's right. He did have a good game on Sunday. He did. Yeah. He played well on Sunday.
I suppose.
Right then, Craig, are you going to continue the Joe Linton love in here, or are you going to bin him?
Absolutely not. I mean, like you've all said, fair play to him. Decent enough performance on the weekend, but James nailed it. The bar is so low, and to be honest, that applies for most performances from us at the moment. If it's anything better than, lower than a snake's belly after Brighton, Tottenham was much better. I genuinely do believe it was a marked step forward, but again, the result didn't match the performance, and ultimately at this stage of the season, that's what matters. When it comes to the 4-4-2, 5-3-2 debate, I think what's interesting is this weekend's game. Burnley will play 4-4-2 every single game, come what may. They never deviate. They never change. It's pretty much you can name the 11 players if they're fit every single week. I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and Miguel Delaney, who I know is often not particularly warmly thought of amongst the fan base, but he did make a really interesting point that Steve Bruce places a lot of importance on almost the team that has the better players will win the game. That famous quote from him, "I don't do tactics, etc." Now, if we're going to go into the game at the weekend, we've obviously got ASM back. We've got hopefully Fraser's over the knock from Scotland, Almiron, and most importantly, Wilson. Will he just go man for man against Burnley and say my 11's better than your 11? And just take them on at their own game. Get the ball wide, get balls into the box. I just wonder whether he'll go that way. And I think the other point I would just make on that sort of debate there is if it comes down to the last two games of the season and we need 3, 4, or maybe even 6 points to stay up, again, is that a time to throw the kitchen sink at it? 4-4-2, we're going to need goals, as James has said. Will that be the time where? Because to be honest, the 3-4-3 I've picked, we've not kept a clean sheet since West Brom, and we've only kept one in the last 9 since that Everton game, which is supposed to be the grand turnaround. Steve Bruce was a centre-back, a really noted centre-back, but you can't teach this team to defend. And I think that's not a point that really gets picked up on. I think everybody focuses on the goals or the lack thereof. We never create chances. The stats, possession, passes into the final third, etc. We're pretty much bottom of the whole league in those stat categories. But we're nowhere near the team we were under Rafa Benitez in terms of defensively sound. And I think Fernandes, for me, is going to be a massive. He's going to have a massive role to play. He's actually my key player if he gets back fit for the last bit of the season. I think he's our best defender at the club. I agree with some of your points, Di, around Lascelles. I think he's looked a bit off it. I think the goals from him have masked some wobbly performances. So yeah, I think for me the context of the league will dictate where we go. But I think for this weekend, I would not be surprised to see him go 4-4-2 and say, right, let's have a dust up and the best team wins.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you for the weekend, I've got to be honest. And I think that might be what we will end up doing going forward. You mentioned Fernandes there, Craig, being your kind of key player. I'm just going to chuck mine into that because I've talked a fair bit here. So we'll just to move on. Mine would be Willock. I think his movement is excellent. I think he's a cut above in terms of the kind of pure quality of player that we have. And I think he can change a game for us. And he showed that on the weekend. I think the boy is absolute class. He's young, he's fit. Great vision, great movement, arrives late in the box, bags of time for him. So I think if he starts, that's a big plus for us. Lee, who's your kind of main go-to man for the rest of the year?
My main go-to man, I genuinely think that St Maximin's due a run. He's had a poor season so far. He's been in and out with injuries. And the reason I think St Maximin in the last 8 games may just sort of take it up a notch, the bloke's an attention seeker. Honestly, he is. He loves all eyes on him. And I think he would revel in the opportunity to be the player who sort of drags Newcastle kicking and screaming to safety. Fitness dependent, because obviously he's just coming back after a few weeks out. But I think if he gets 2 or 3 games under his back and he stays clear of injury, I think he could be the biggest and most important player for the next 6 to 7 weeks.
Yeah,
just so it's all eyes on him.
Yeah. James?
Well, it would be daft of me not to mention our best player, Callum Wilson, but I'm not going to talk about him because we all know how good he is. The two I'd like to mention, Matt Ritchie, mentioned him before. Sunday, he was outstanding, vocal, aggressive, won his duels, won his 50-50s. Great work for the first goal. He just looks like he's got a point to prove again, and it's great to see him back to his best. And another one I'd like to mention, Sean Longstaff. With Hayden out for the rest of the season, he's probably now, hopefully now, going to get a run in the team and has a massive opportunity to prove himself again.
I think the only thing I would add just before we round off is between the four of us, we come up with 3 different formations and umpteen different permutations of players. So you can look at that either way. You can say, well, that's a massive strength. We've got loads of options. We're getting players back fit at the right time. But then the flip side of that is the manager's got to have the nous and the ability to flip between potential formations and personnel over the course of the season. I think the jury's out whether he's got the skill to do that.
Great point, Craig.
Yeah, I would totally agree, Craig. That is a really good point. We are going to move it on because we've done 26 minutes on that. The big. I think that is the import. That's the key thing. I think though that we need to take looking forward. But James, you mentioned there that you would have Darlow back in goal. I am really intrigued to hear why.
Okay. Well, what I will say is that, before I start talking about why I would have Darlow, we are very, very blessed with having 3 exceptional goalkeepers right now. We don't have a bad goalkeeper. We've got 3 very, very good ones. Obviously, Freddie Woodman being the third, who I'm sure you'll come on to talk about later, Di. But if I'm going to answer that question based on this season alone, just on this season alone, then for me, Darlow is my number 1 next season and would be going in the next 5 years. I think what Darlow has done for us this season, especially in the first half, when I think we were 12th at one point, he's just outstanding. I don't think I've seen a better performance from a keeper than that game he had against Spurs at the start of the season. He was a man possessed, 11 saves I think he made, man the match. Let's be fair, we're robbed a point, didn't we, with that last minute penalty. But personally, I don't think he did enough wrong to get dropped in the first place, and especially in the manner it happened, which I didn't agree with either. But at one point, he was being linked with England and getting into the Euro squad, and it just think with having that taken away from him a little bit by Bruce, and then and him being dropped in the way he was, it hurt me a bit. But what I will say about Dubravka, though, is since he has come back into the team, and I understand he hasn't played many games, I think it's 5 or 6, but I don't think he's shown the commanding presence of previous seasons. And he doesn't appear to have fully regained that form since the injury. I thought he should have done better with the Neves header against Wolves, to be honest. I might have been in the minority again, but I thought he should have done better with Kane's second goal on Sunday as well. I just think Dubravka is yet to show the levels of consistency we're used to seeing with him. And for that reason, my number 1 going forward, certainly going to next season anyway, would be Darlow. But I do think the age thing comes into this as well. Dubravka, I believe he's 32. Saying he's arguably past his peak, but Darlow's a couple of years younger than him. I think Darlow's just turned 30. And I think right now, if you look at it just based on age, I think Darlow probably is in his peak years. And I think as well, you've got to possibly look at predominantly how many seasons you're going to get out of each goalkeeper. And again, the age thing comes into consideration for me. But certainly if you're going to look at based on all the performances combined, then you would say Dubravka would of course be the better choice. But I'm basing it predominantly on this season alone. Darlow's my number 1.
I mean, I'm sure Charlotte, who is obviously Dubravka's number 1 fan, would have a lot to say about that. To have a lot to say about those comments. Lee, just to come to you there, I can see where you're coming from, James, a lot of the time. But obviously, do you agree? But more than that, is there a point at this stage to more disruption in that position, or should we just stick with where they are?
I think just coming on to a couple of things that James mentioned, I think absolutely Darlow didn't deserve to be dropped. He certainly didn't deserve to be dropped via Luke Edwards. I I think it's fair to say that just before he was dropped there, Darlow's form had dipped a little, which is going to happen. And again, I would agree with your thought that Dubravka hasn't looked the same since he came back. But we have to remember that Dubravka was out for a fair old length of time, and he's going to take a little while to get back into sort of a match mentality. Most important thing for me when it comes to goalkeepers, there's two things. First one is experience. You can't sort of buy experience, and let's be honest, Dubravka's a Slovak international. He's been playing regularly week in, week out for 3 years in the Premier League. The back four, whoever's playing in the back four, are familiar with him. They feel comfortable with him. So that experience really. Darlow, since he joined from Forest, same day as Lascelles, Darlow's played second fiddle for a good 5 or 6 years, however long ago that was. He's not had that continuous first team experience other than this season. So for me, we're going into what's going to be a dogfight in the next 8 games. And for me, I want experience in there. The second part on top of experience is communication. Darlow, it doesn't demand of his defence in the same way Dubravka does. Dubravka seems to have a lot more about him in terms of pulling his fullbacks where he wants them, his centre halves, directing sort of what's going on in front of him. That might just be my perception of things, but I think Dubravka's far, far more vocal, and we're going to need a vocal goalkeeper over the course of the next 8 games. So for me, it's going to be Dubravka, but I would agree with you, James. Darlow didn't deserve to be dropped, and Dubravka doesn't look the same goalkeeper. I mean, when it comes to shot stopping, I think personally they're much of a muchness. I don't think there's a great deal of difference to them when it comes to commanding their area. In terms of coming out for crosses, again, I don't think there's a great deal of difference. Distribution on both parts is poor. Dubravka's, since he's came back, has been poor. I can think of umpteen occasions where he's tried to play a ball out to a fullback or a wide midfielder, and he's put it straight out of touch. So in terms of goalkeeping abilities at the moment, I don't think there's a great deal to call between the two of them. But for me, I'm going for the experience in what's going to be a dogfight over the next 8 games.
Craig, can you settle this debate one way or the other? You have to decide and vote here.
I can sort of agree with a bit of both of what the lads have said, to be honest. I think just picking up on what James was saying, I think it is a strong spot for us, but I'm actually thinking, is it as strong as we thought it was? I think Dubravka's come back, and I would agree he's been nowhere near what his best form was under Rafa in the first season under Bruce. He's looked wobbly. I think it's not just for me is the error that James mentioned against Wolves. Again, I think me and James were in the minority thinking that the Kane's second goal on Sunday, it wasn't in the corner. You know, he has taken the shot quickly, understanding there's plenty of power on it, but it's certainly not in the corner of the goal. And even if you want to be really harsh, the first one at Brighton, it's hit from a long way out. It has gone in the corner, but he's got plenty of time to get across. But for me, I would stick with Dubravka, I think, purely because the point you raised, Di, was just more disruption. I didn't like when Darlow got dropped. I didn't like how it was done, as Lee referenced. I think there was always a feeling, whether it was just me or I'm sure it was, to be honest, amongst most of the fan base, is that as soon as Dubravka got fit, Bruce was just looking for the first time he could really put him back in. And he was just waiting for Darlow to make 1 or 2 errors. And at the first opportunity, he was going to put him straight back in. And I felt Darlow deserves a little bit more loyalty than that. I think he's bailed Bruce out on a number of times this season, won us points when we had no right to win points. Spurs away, as James mentioned, was the absolute perfect example of that. Superhuman that day. Boardroom, it was just ridiculous. And I felt for him. I really did feel for him. I didn't think it was handled well. But we're here now. I think to move back to him now is just we don't need any more disruption of that position. I think we can get to the summer, and I'm all for having a debate on what the future looks like. And obviously, Di's going to bring Woodman into the discussion in a second. I think just coming on to the future, I think we've got to just bring a couple of things in. Both Dubravka and Darlow are on long deals tied to the summer of 2025, I believe. So, the club are in the box seat if they want to sell one or the other, depending probably on who they can get the most value for, the biggest fee for in the market. We're obviously in the box seat there. So, and let's face it, if the purse strings are tight, they are 2 of our most saleable assets, both in terms of, I would slightly disagree with James. I think as a keeper, the age profile slightly differs, so you might get a longer sort of shelf life. But I think it would not surprise me if one of those leaves in the summer. And yeah, but I'm all for having a sort of a discussion on that. I don't think, as Lee said, there's much of a difference between them now. I did used to think Dubravka was absolutely the clear number one. And with a pre-season and a run of games, he may get back to that form he showed. But at the moment, I would say the change from Darlow to Dubravka hasn't really paid off, both in terms of the disruption in the camp and in terms of the performances he's put in.
I think what's difficult about the situation is that, like you've all referenced it there, is that Darlow shouldn't have been dropped in the first place. And the way he was dropped has made a mess of the situation. And I would argue that the way it happened has probably annoyed Dubravka in a way as well. Even though he's got back in, he's thinking this guy's got absolutely no loyalty to anyone here. And I think, and I can see that having a negative effect on the goalkeeping group as a core. I don't think there's any point in changing. I don't think one is particularly better than the other at this stage of the game. I agree with you, Dubravka is the better goalkeeper, historically, but at the moment, I don't think there's a difference between one or the other, and the disruption of changing again, I don't think solves anyone's problems. I just wanted to have a nod at Woodman for the future. Obviously, as a Welshman running a Welsh football podcast, I keep a keen eye on the Welsh teams, and obviously Swansea's one of them. I've watched a fair amount of Woodman this year, and he is a really, really, really good shot stopper. His agility and the way he can read situations is excellent. The two areas he needs to improve is his physicality. He doesn't command his area. His communication is pretty good, but in terms of how he dominates when he's kind of shouting things, I think is something he needs to improve on. And his distribution with his feet is really, really average. And what has happened a lot to Swansea of late is that they play the ball around the back and hope to create a bit of space in midfield and break quickly. And a lot of that comes from Woodman keeping the ball. And unfortunately, people have worked that out. And in the South Wales derby a couple of weeks ago, he was pressed a lot, gave up a couple of chances, kept booting the ball into touch, which is exactly what Cardiff wanted because they had a long throw expert in Will Volk. So it genuinely ruined their game plan. And I'm not for one moment suggesting the fact that Swansea have been on an awful run of form is just his fault. But I do think there's an element that people have worked out how to get at them. And I do think a large part of that is because of him. We're talking about selling them and a shelf life and whatever. I think he's got one more year in him before he can come back. I think if he has one more year on the bench, I don't think that's doing him any favours. And I don't think it's going to do us any favours in the long term either. We don't want him to have that one more year of development with us. We want him to come back to us when he's ready to go in. And I think, like you mentioned, the shelf life of the player there, I also think a goalkeeper's career, in inverted commas, starts a little bit later. Yeah. You look at our two players as a perfect example of that. I think they've both hit their peaks much later in life, got their chances later in life, and by footballer standards, obviously. And I think as a consequence of kind of being very good, and I think the similar situation might happen to Woodman. I think he is worth having one more year on loan, and if we are going to cash in, I would keep Gillespie as the number 2 for 1 year. Give Woodman that one more year on loan before bringing him back and making the most of him, because there is undoubtedly potential there.
Yeah, I think really, really good insight, Di. And he's 24 now. This is his 5th loan spell. Without a shadow of a doubt, at the highest level he's played at. He's top of the championship, competing for an automatic playoff place, so under the most scrutiny as well. He's been in England youth international all the way through, so he's clearly very, very well, highly thought of. We've also got Shola Ramiobi, I believe, as the loan coordination manager, so I'm sure he's got a grand plan in up his sleeve for Woodman. But yeah, I certainly want to see him. If it's not this summer, next summer, I want him to come back and either just walk in as number 1 or to go in as the sort of into a fight in pre-season for that jersey, but really with him as the nominated number 1. I think he to me, we've invested in him, we've kept the faith, we've developed him, we've obviously sent him out on loan. I'd love to see him come back and be our number 1 for 10 years or so. But yeah, really interesting what you say. It's clearly got a lot of potential. So, like you say, 24 for a keeper is not, other players you start and to wonder by then, it's probably time for them to either start dropping down divisions. Keepers get that little bit more of a longer sort of learning curve, don't they? So it'll be interesting to see when he come back and what the club's plan is for him.
I think. Sorry,
go on. I was just going to say very quick. You go.
I think Darlow will be away in the summer. I personally think that the relationship between him and Bruce, the way the whole change was handled, I wouldn't be surprised if that relationship's irreparable. I see a scenario where Woodman's recalled in the summer when Darlow's pedalled. We'll get good money for Darlow. There'll be a good few Premier League clubs lining up for Darlow given his performances this season. But I would see Woodman coming back and Woodman being sort of understudy to Dubravka for a year, 2 years before Woodman ultimately becomes number one. I just can't see anywhere that Darlow's here for the 2021-22 season at all. And
I do know what you mean. I think the one thing that might be in the back of a lot of people's minds, especially for those who've been at the club a longer time, is a Fraser Forster type situation where he's got a lot of potential. He goes, I think he went to Celtic, he set all sorts of records at Celtic, and then he thinks, right, I'm good now, I can go. And we don't want Woodman to do the same thing, to think, right, I've had enough of being on loan, I want to settle down, I want to put roots down, I want to be part of a club, I want to build something. And I do think that is the only thing which might kind of sway the club one way or the other, is we want him to have the opportunities to grow. We don't want him to have the opportunity to think I can bugger off somewhere else. So I think it is a difficult act.
One final point I will mention on this situation is Lee mentioned this. I can't see how Darlow can accept to be second choice next season. I mean, he's too good of a keeper to be sat on the bench every week as a backup. And look, Arsenal had this exact same problem last season with Leno and Martinez. And of course, one of them had to go. They both wanted regular first team football. And look, the decision was made. Martinez was sold to Villa, and arguably that decision turned out to be the wrong one, because Martinez has been far the better keeper this season, and most Arsenal fans have been adamant the wrong keeper was sold. So you would hope that if we were to do that, we wouldn't make the same mistake they did.
Great point.
We'd hope so. That's a great point, yeah. We're going to finish on a light note, which is, what has been your favourite away day so far? Craig, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, so I think for me, I've been on a few memorable ones. I was at Bruges away, which was a great trip. I think my first one was Everton away. We got beat, but it's your first one, so it held special memories. But I think for me, it was Leicester City away. And anniversary was, I think it's tomorrow, actually, April the 7th, 2018. So getting on for 3 years ago. Rafa was manager. We just come into the game off the back of a couple of wins, and we were going to Leicester, who were sort of challenging for Europe. This is still when they had Claude Puel as manager. And for me, it was just a complete away day. I was coming up from London, got on the train with my mate Matt, a few tins on the train on the way up to Leicester. I used to live in Leicester when I was just coming out of uni as well for 3 months, so it was sort of nice to go back straight classy as I am, straight into the spoons off the train, a few more beers, and then it was a lovely sunny day, sort of early spring day, and walks the couple of miles over to the King Power. There was just that feeling. We come off the back of a couple of wins. We sort of were borderline safe. This is Rafa's first season in the Prem, and it was just a sort of, when you get that expectancy amongst the fans, there was a real sort of, Leicester's not a nasty place to go. It's sort of friendly sort of banter between the two fans. It was just that sort of good feeling about the day, and the game didn't let us down. So basically we went ahead 1-0 in the first half, Shelby with a deflected strike, and then held that till around the 75th minute. Perez scored a really memorable lob over Schmeichel from about 35, 40 yards out, beautifully sort of crafted with the outside of his right boot. The away end was absolutely on fire that day. Really good.
Was that the day of the famous clip with the 10 tackles in about 30 seconds?
I was going to come on to that, because we were obviously, as any away end is, well oiled at that point, and I think we were 2-0 up, but absolutely unbelievable. Just everyone cheered louder than the last. I think there was 7 in a row, and it was just, we won every single one. Absolutely. I've never seen out like it before since. And it just sort of, for me, it just sort of summed up everything that the club was about at that time. It was unified. It was playing for the shirt. Rafa was leading the charge, but the players absolutely knew what they needed to do and were willing to leave every last drop out on the pitch to get it done. And, Leicester sort of scored a consolation late doors, but it was a thoroughly deserved win. It was a bit of a tactical masterclass, really. Against a team with better players. This was a Leicester of Chilwell, Maguire, Vardy. Of the 11 that day, 6 are still at the club. Yedlin's just left and Lejeune's at Alaves. So don't let anybody tell you that the squad that Steve Bruce has now is worse than what Rafa had, or he's not, Much more can be got out of these players than the current manager is getting out of them. And that day just proved it. It was just fantastic. And the sort of, at the final whistle, I think the players knew the job was done in terms of securing safety. They just came all over right in front of the away end. Few shirts got chucked in, and it was just one of those where you stay behind 10-15 minutes singing "Don't Take Me Home," and just happy memories. It had everything. It had sort of the weather, the result, the performance, the atmosphere, the result. It was just everything you wanted out of an away day. So really, really fond memories of that one.
I think mine is a similar one to yours in that I think it's about the day and the experience as much as the football. Well, for mine, in fact, the football was completely pointless. But I went to the friendly tournament we had against Schalke in the picturesque German city of Gelsenkirchen. I don't know if anyone's ever been there, but I would not.
The one that no one ever stays in when they go to visit.
Found that out the hard way, didn't I? So I did like a big road trip that summer with one of my mates, and a few other boys kind of met us there. We basically drove around Northern Europe, taking in a few different cities, Bruges, Brussels, obviously down to Gelsenkirchen, and a few others on the way back as well. It was a great trip, and I think the football was pointless. It was just a kind of thought of, this is what being a Newcastle fan should be like. We should be going to these great kind of European cities, not the Gelsenkirchen's one, but everyone was drinking in Dusseldorf, which wasn't far away on the train, had a cracking day. The beer over there is obviously absolutely glorious. And
great
just
city.
My abiding memory of the trip was getting on the train up to the ground, and as you got off the train, there was a woman selling beers out of a cooler. And she said, "Oh, do you want any beers, lads?" We were like, "Yeah, okay, we'll take 2 for the walk." And what we didn't realise is you had to get off the train, and to get into the stadium, you had to go through their fencing. But of course, you had to show your ticket at that point to get through the fence. I thought you weren't just getting close to the ground. That was the ground. You're in the perimeter. You had to show your ticket to get in. I was like, "Oh, bloody hell, I've just bought 2 beers here." So I had my 2 cans in my hand and my ticket hanging out of my back pocket. And I got to the front and I was just like, "I don't suppose I can bring these in." The fellow was just like, yeah, don't worry about it. Took my ticket out of my back pocket, scanned it for me, put it back in my back pocket, and I kind of staggered in with my 2 cheap cans in there as I was walking in. It was just brilliant, and it was what kind of Newcastle, being a Newcastle fan, going away to these great places. It's what it should be like in my mind. It was just a great trip. The West Ham fans were dicks if anyone did go, and I'm sure you'll remember that. But it was, on the whole, a really enjoyable few days. What about you, James?
Yeah, for me, I've picked a more memorable result than an experience, and for me, it was the Man U away game at Old Trafford in December 2013, Johan Cabaye special. What a day that was. I mean, we hadn't won there in 41 years, I think it was, and it was just an incredible feeling to finally break that duck. We had a good team back then. I mean, look, Pardew was still at the helm, but we had quality in that side, and we really deserved that win. The likes of Loic Remy, Ben Arthur, Sissoko, Tiote, Debuchy, and, of course, Cabaye, who was just a special player. What a goal it was, great play from Sissoko down the right-hand side, left Evra for dead, and puts in a cracking centre for Cabaye, busting a gut to get in the box, and bam, first time, no mistake. De Gea didn't get anywhere near it. And if anyone remembers that game like I do, we played in the yellow chain shirts that game, the famous Brazil colours, and that goal Cabaye scored, any Brazilian team would have been proud of.
And they all came and celebrated right in front of us.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, look, Man U were going through a kind of a post-Fergie transition at the time, that kind of David Moyes era, and he wasn't having much luck. And but look, they still had the likes of Van Persie, Zaha, Vidic, Evra, some really good players in that time, but they didn't get a sniff that day. And huge credit for the way we defended, kept them out of the game. Colaccini was class, kept Van Persie quiet. Tim Krul made some great saves, and was just the perfect performance, really. And yeah, you know, I mean, going down there with my dad and a couple of his mates, the four of us went down. Of course, the celebrations were plentiful there that evening in Manchester, and it was just a memorable weekend.
I just want to add one thing to that as well. I went to that as well with my brother-in-law, now brother-in-law, who's a Man United fan, and I'm sure you remember that. I think it was Van Persie scored, and it was disallowed.
Disallowed, yes, I remember that. Yeah,
bless him, was like a coiled spring. He hadn't bothered looking at the lino, and how he managed to control himself, I don't know. But he kind of, because we were in the away end, he was kind of shaking and like didn't know what to do. And then everyone around started cheering, and I just kind of slowly pointed down to the lino.
Oh, miles offside. Offside.
It was amazing. The look on his little face was priceless. So, as you say, the celebrations were plentiful that night. What about you, Lee? Finish us off.
My away day experiences are more about memories and creating memories, and I've found the last 15 to 20 years probably far more difficult, because I think the atmosphere at away games is far more sterile than it was possibly in the early 90s, late 80s. So I try and hark back to some really sort of standout memories when I'm thinking about away days. A couple of examples I've got for you. I went to Port Vale around about 1990, jumped off a train, me and a couple of my friends, absolutely tanked up. Thought we'd ask this police van, or the occupants of a police van, if they'd give us a lift up to Vale Park. To our surprise, they did. So me and my two pals jumped in the back of this police van with a 6-pack or a 4-pack, as it would have been, and actually got a lift to the ground. And it just, that sort of thing, you don't get that sort of thing anymore. We went to Wolves, probably around about the same sort of time, I think, when Jim Smith was manager, and we literally sang Jimmy Smith's Black and White Army for probably 60 or 70 minutes non-stop, to the point where it started to really piss off the West Midlands Constabulary. It did, and they started to kick people out. Broke a couple of ribs at Peterborough, probably early 90s. I think it might have been in the promotion season. Sheffield Wednesday, again, another example, the year after Hillsborough. I was one of the first in the ground on a Wednesday night the year after Hillsborough in Leppings Lane. And I remember entering the ground and going down to the front of the seating area above Leppings Lane and looking down over where obviously the incident happened, and there was blue tarpaulin across where it had all taken place. And I remember it was very, very quiet pre-game, and just the thought of what that must have been like to experience. So mine are sort of more around specific moments and specific things that have happened. I've had some very interesting days behind enemy lines. Feared for my life at Leeds. Got ejected at Leicester and put straight back into the Newcastle end, which was a win. I remember playing hide and seek with a steward at Arsenal in the Arsenal end before getting ejected. But if you had to pin me down to my favourite ever away day, it would be my first. January 1984, probably 3 or 4 months after my first home game. I went to Newcastle at Liverpool in the FA Cup when Keegan and McDermott returned to Anfield. I was only 10. You hear stories of 15,000, 10,000, 12,000 Magpies have gone down to Liverpool that night. It was a Friday night and taken over the place. But the memory I have from that was walking up into the Kemlyn Road end, which is what it should be called, and just seeing the sheer size of the cop. As a 10-year-old lad, I'd never seen or experienced anything like the cop in full voice in all of my life. And that away trip, being my first one, will stay with me for the rest of my life.
Well, that is a pretty positive way to end. I do want to very quickly have a quick yes or no from you. After this weekend, are we staying up? I'm saying yes. Craig, go.
I'm going to stick with what I said on the previous writer's block. I've got a gut feeling we will stay up.
There you go. 2 for 2. Perfect. Lee, what are you saying?
Yes. Fulham have had the stuffing knocked out of them this weekend. That has set them back for me. I
agree. James is the harbinger of doom here. He's been saying for a while we're going to go down. So are you going to deny us a full house, James?
Well, you know, I always like to be different, lads. You know me. Unfortunately, I'm going to still say no. But look, let me just say one thing before you kill me with this here. If you'd asked me straight after the international break, after the Brighton game, I would have categorically said no. I mean, I didn't think we had a chance in hell after that game. But after the performance on Sunday, Wilson coming back, Fulham are struggling to get results. I'm a lot more hopeful that something might happen. But personally, I think it's going to go down to the last game of the season at Craven Cottage. And look, that could go either way. But if I'm going to put my head on the block now and I'm going to give you an answer, unfortunately, I still don't think we've got enough. I think we've left it too late, and our run-in is just horrendous. So I'm really sorry, lads. Can't give you a full house. But I really, really hope I'm proved wrong.
Well, there you go. Those are the 4 longest one-word answers you will ever hear. I thank you very much for watching the True Faith Writers Block. Hopefully, we will see you again soon. Thank you very much, and good night.
Cheers, Di.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, lads. Bye-bye.